So welcome back, everybody, and we're going to move straight on now to our next panel. So the next panel is going to be looking at facilitating wireless access and investments for a smarter future. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our moderator for the session. So I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Roberto Ocole. Roberto, welcome, and really looking forward to the panel, and over to you. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our to welcome to the stage Roberto. Roberto, you have the main platform. You can shut your other windows on your computer. So without further ado, I'm just going to take Roberto down whilst he does that. So he's just going to shut the other windows if you can on your browser. I think we have the echo because of the slight delay on the platform itself. So over to you.
Okay.
And we've still got that. Take Roberto down whilst he does that. So you're just going to shut the other windows if you can on your browser. Perfect. There we are. Never a pleasant English with me again. So no problem, Roberto. Over to you.
Thank you very much. My apologies, everyone. So it's an honor to moderate this panel, and I'd like to thank CITC and ITU for inviting me. It's been a very well-run event and very well organized. So today we want to look at how spectrum policy should promote certainty and encourage investment through future-proofing planning and embrace market-oriented approaches. We'd like to look at this very much from the idea of complementarity. So that is that any modern economy needs a mix of technologies to provide communications, which we've heard from yesterday, how important they are. And in fact, yesterday we had comments from His Excellency, the Minister Al-Sawaha and Deputy Governor Al-Otaibi on the importance of a mix of complementary technologies that can promote connectivity and connect the unconnected and lessen the digital opportunity divide. So it's not just a purely academic issue. It's about trying to get the right mix of technologies and how a regulator should approach that, or how an administration should approach that. And we're going to do that through looking at some of the key technologies that are emerging technologies. So obviously satellite, Wi-Fi, and high altitude IMT base station platforms, HIBs. So it's very important to look at how the mix of technologies and the regulatory requirements are for the optimal use of maximizing the social welfare. And one of the things that's obviously important nowadays because of the scarcity of spectrum is to look at market-orientated approaches. So how we're going to do this is to look at the technologies and look at the policy implications, and then have a discussion about that afterwards. So if I could introduce the first presentation, and that's from Mohammed. My apologies. That's from Mohammed Abdul Qadar. And he's an experienced spectrum manager with more than 12 years experience with CITC. And before that, he was with Mobily. He's worked on various aspects of spectrum, international and national policy. And he's also the chairman of the Gulf Cooperation Council for the WRC preparations. So over to you, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Roberto, and good afternoon to everybody. In my presentation, I would like to talk about facilitating wireless access and innovations for a smarter future of spectrum. So can we go to the next slide, please? So here I would like to show the CITC journey in enabling more spectrum for IMT services, where we started in 2017 by having 420 megahertz assigned to the mobile operators. And we end up by 2019 by assigning a total amount of 1,110 for IMT spectrum. These 5 doubles of the amount of spectrums has give us a good result in achieving high speed of internet. And we are targeting, inshallah, We are not stopping here. We are targeting to have more than 5,000 megahertz to be assigned for IMT in the next few years. Talking about the mid band and low band, and also for the high bands, the millimetric waves. So can we go to the next slide, please? So when you talk about the effect of the spectrum on the mobile market, we can say that the spectrum is an indicator for the competition in the market, but there are ways for the regulators to eliminate some burdens, some regulatory burdens, and promote the deployment or promote the technology neutrality and service neutrality in order to give the mobile operators the chance to operate and provide their services to the public, to the business. Also, there is an interesting article made by you, Mr. Moderator Roberto. It's about the duplicating the sites, the double of investment that it might be not needed in some of the urban cities. So you gave in that article an example of in Saudi Arabia, where we have an amount of 6,000 mobile sites in the cities where there are possibilities of sharing between the mobile operators, so they can save the cost and pay that money for the spectrum, and then it's a good for the consumers to have the service in better prices. Talking about the need for additional entrant in the market, I think we show a great example here at Saudi Arabia by having 3 operators and providing best user experience for the public. So we don't think that the regulator should decide. It's a market decision to decide if there is a need for additional mobile operator or there is a need for MVNO in the market. Can we go to the next slide, please? Here we have some challenges that may address the new spectrum policy. There are some challenges, for example, in Saudi Arabia, where we have a large area country. We have rural areas, rural regions that maybe it's not economically beneficial for operator to invest there. Also, another challenge, which is the capacity challenge in urban and suburban cities, where we think that there are opportunity and solutions for that for the regulators to work on enabling the national roaming, the passive sharing and active sharing between mobile operators, saving cost, the possibility for operators to do that, to do these activities, and to promote shared rural infrastructures in these villages that need better service. Also, there was a keynote speaker by Mr. Sunil today. He mentioned that the emerging LEO satellite services, it will provide the best services and for broadband services for the public in villages, and it's a kind of a competition between markets, between services that the regulator should pay attention on that and try to predict the future for enabling the spectrum for such radio services. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide, please. What we did in CITC that before months we published a public consultation where we asked the national and international organizations about the access rights of spectrum, the release mechanisms, frequency bands that we think it will be important for innovative and commercial use of spectrum. And also we have asked about the emerging technologies in order to, let's say, ITC build their future outlook for the next 4 years. We are happy that we received a number of 60 feedbacks from organizations nationally and internationally that will help us in drafting our outlook and publishing the draft soon, inshallah. Can we go to the next slide, please? What we think in our outlook that we will publish, we are planning to refarm the 600 megahertz. It's this band is very important as a low band for IMT services. We think that there is an opportunity to repack the broadcasting services here and move them below 640 megahertz. This will be shown in the draft outlook that we are planning to release soon. With regard to the licensed spectrum, we are aiming to have the either 700 or 800 megahertz. I mean a portion of 10 megahertz for IMT services. We are planning also to award the 1.5, 2.1, and the rest of the bands. 3.8 to 4 gigahertz is a good example for enabling the future IMT services based on the demand. But we will not. We are paying attention to the current utilization of spectrum for fixed satellite service in this band in Saudi Arabia. This is what we think that we are planning to do in our draft outlook, and it will be open for, public, for organizations to provide their feedback. With regard to the trading and the sharing, we are aiming also to enable sharing and trading between mobile operators. Also, we are targeting to apply light licensing regimes in some of the bands and have a CITC database that give a possibility of dynamic spectrum sharing. Also, we are paying attention to the unlicensed regime. While we have the 6 gigahertz, we are planning to have this part of this band for Wi-Fi services. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide. Here, just talking about the emerging technologies that we introduced in the public consultation. We are seeking to make the most efficient use of spectrum possible in order to maximize the contribution to the kingdom productivity. Next slide, please. Here, just we're talking about 5.5 gigahertz of spectrum. We are targeting to be licensed in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's part of it in the mid band, part of it in the high band. We are also paying attention to the private networks and some of the. We're talking about the 400 megahertz and so on. Also the V2X, and we also for the bands, the spectrum bands that we think that it's too early to decide on releasing the spectrum for different innovative use of spectrum. We think we will enable tests and trials in this band in the future, inshallah. Next slide, please. What we anticipate the impact of our outlook, we anticipate the increase of GDP from 2.4 to 3.4%. We are increasing the non-oil revenue from 18 to, we are targeting as per our spectrum strategy to be from 18 to 36 billion riyal. Also, we are intent to power the industry 4.0 to provide the framework for the nation digital transformation. With that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. And it's very interesting to hear the ideas that CITC has with a spectrum licensing database and sharing, and also the impact on the GDP of Saudi Arabia. I think you mentioned 3.4% from spectrum, and I've seen similar figures for other countries. So it just goes to show the importance of spectrum. So now I'd like to introduce a very interesting presentation from Osama Kamimura. He's a Vice President and Head of Spectrum Policy at SoftBank. He is responsible for international standardization and domestic regulatory activities. He's more than 20 years experience in the industry, and he has his knowledge through experience with several mobile operating companies. He's also attended WRCs and leads SoftBank's international standardization work. And he's here to talk about high altitude IMT base stations. These are airplanes that can be sort of 20 kilometers above the Earth and provide coverage especially effectively in rural areas. But I'll leave that to Osamu to present that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Roberto, for the introduction. So thank you for giving this kind of opportunity to introduce our project HIPS, named HIPS. My name is Osamu Kamimura from SoftBank and HAPS Mobile as well. The HAPS Mobile is a subsidiary company of SoftBank. So please go to the next slide. Next slide, please. So HIPS is an abbreviation of this word, high altitude IMT base stations. Next slide, please. And then if we think about providing a huge coverage area from the sky, our, intention is like this kind of technology, like, satellite related technology, and then also the airplane in the, higher altitude in the sky. Next slide, please. So we chose stratosphere layer. We can see some advantages in this kind of layer, stratosphere layer. Firstly, annual average wind speed is very low and stable, like from 5 to 15 meters per second. And then second one is that this place is a explored area, like undeveloped area, and it's kind of vacant. Next slide, please. And also we can see the one advantage which is lower latency. That it's very simply, due to the distance from the ground compared to the satellite. The HIPS in the stratosphere area have lower latency than satellite system. Next slide, please. So with this system, HIPS, we can have the kind of the very wide coverage area, like 200 kilometers in diameter. And then this is very important point. We can use existing device as it is without any modification for this kind of specific usage. Next slide, please. Now this is very obvious one. Primary use cases, we can get a wider coverage area, and also even in the natural disaster situation, we can have a stable, coverage area, and then we can control those things, as it is. Next slide, please. And in addition to that, we can see the new, kind of the business, the new generation kind of business, like autonomous driving related business, and then drones related business as well. So next, please. So let's see the video explaining about the HAPS, the aircraft. Let's proceed.
HAPS Mobile uses an aircraft equipped with a mobile base station that is designed to fly for several months. Using lightweight carbon materials, it can fly even with little wind. With a total wingspan of about 78 meters, it can also withstand turbulence. The wings house solar panels, while the aircraft is equipped with high-performance batteries. During the day, the aircraft flies, while solar panels charge the batteries. During the night, the aircraft continues to fly off the charged batteries. The aircraft does not use any fossil fuels, making it completely sustainable. Given these technologies, we predicted the aircraft could fly for 24 hours, and that is why we started the HAPS business. The onboard computer automatically controls the aircraft according to wind patterns. The simple wing-based design improves aerodynamic performance and also makes mass production possible. During takeoff, the aircraft follows guidance from the Airport Takeoff and Landing Center. It flies in circles to increase its altitude. When it reaches the stratosphere, a globally managed operation system directs the aircraft to a specific service location. Once it arrives at its service location, the aircraft flies continuously on autopilot for several months, delivering internet connectivity to the ground. The aircraft's design makes it possible to switch or replace systems as necessary. This makes it compatible with LTE, 5G, and all other types of base stations. The aircraft can also house sensors and cameras. In 2019, 2 years after we started the design process, the aircraft cleared NASA's safety review tests and succeeded in its first flight. The aircraft will soon be flying in different parts of the world. A connected world is right around the corner.
So let's proceed. Next slide, please. So in this year, 2020, we have also the test flight leading to the stratosphere layer. Next slide, please. That test flight was successfully done with the communication test, including the video calls through the stratosphere layer. Next slide, please. We have the industrial organization named HAPS Alliance. In this alliance, we are discussing about various kinds of things like the things related to the telecom industry's rules, and then aviation related to rules, and also business ecosystems as well. So next slide, please. If we use this kind of system, of course, we need a frequency band, feeder link, and then service link. Next slide, please. So the HIPS service is under the umbrella of the country's local MNO's mobile service. So in this sense, IMT spectrum assigned to MNOs can be used for HIPS. This is our basic concept. Next slide, please. So now in the current regulation, we can use 2 GHz for HIPS, but only 2 GHz. With only 2 GHz, we cannot get any flexibility. Each country has each situation, each mobile operator has each context. In order to have a kind of flexibility, we need to have more frequency band to be used, like from 700 to 900 MHz to the 2.6 GHz. So actually, for HIPS, that we are now discussing in ITUR toward WC23. Next slide, please. And then this is just shown the schedule for the next new regulations. Maybe due date for the new regulation would be the beginning of 2025 if the situation is very well in the future. Next slide, please. So this slide shows just the takeaways for today's presentation. The HIPS concept is beneficial to the world, and then especially creating a new business opportunities related to autonomous driving and then drones, and also the technology related to the stratosphere layer is just around the corner. This is a very important point. And then also activities concerning WRC23 agenda item 1.4 is very vital for the practical utilization of HIPS system. Next, please. So this is almost just last slide of this presentation. So before 1903 and then before 1955, 57, we couldn't really easily predict mankind could fly over the sky, and then we couldn't easily predict mankind could launch a lot of artificial satellites and could get benefits from them like today. And then now we are in the similar situation like 1903 and then 1957. At least in 10 years from now, I believe the HIPS hubs would be a normal in our daily life and providing a lot of benefit to mankind. Next slide, please. So today's challenge will be tomorrow's normal. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sam. That was very, very interesting, and it's very good to hear that these new greener technologies can be used to help provide rural coverage. It looks a very exciting technology. Now I'd like to present Andrew, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Ruskowski. So he's from O3B Power, SES. And the O3B, the other 3 billion?
Right.
Okay, so Andrew's an 18-year veteran of the satellite industry. He started with Pan Am Sat in 1998. He joined SES, New Sky Satellite Services, in 2000. He's had various roles in the SES family. In 2016, he joined the Mobile Market Solutions Center as Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and was instrumental in making the mobile vertical, the fastest growing segment of the SES business. Andrew holds a master's degree from the American University and a bachelor's degree in Washington, D.C. And he also has a degree from Krakow in Poland. So with that, I'd like to hand over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Robert. It's an honor to be here today with such an august group of panelists. And just to clarify a little bit, I'm actually part of SES, and I'm leading commercialization of the O3BM power system, which will be coming online beginning next year. So I have a keen eye toward the wireless access market. And what I'd like to do today is to talk just a little bit about where SES is coming from in terms of investment there, and give you our view of what makes for a healthy ecosystem around a radio spectrum and resources for that. So next slide, please. Very quickly, just a little bit about, to remind folks who know SES and introduce SES to those who are not familiar with us. We are the largest satellite operator in the world today. We operate in headquarters out of Luxembourg and have two primary business units, a video-focused business unit and a networks-based focused business unit. Combined, those units bring content to over 1 billion people around the world today. We connect customers in over 130 countries on a whole range of platforms, from fixed to mobile platforms. We are the leader in high definition and ultra high definition content delivery to a range of devices. On a regular basis, we are helping communities restore and connectivity and recover from natural disasters and other unexpected events. We are innovators. We innovate in technology and innovate in commercial models. Very notably, SES has done a lot to make for a more healthy launch environment for space. And finally, SES is a keen service provider and partner to telcos around the world, working toward connecting the unconnected world, but also accelerating rollout of 4G and 5G into markets around the world. Next slide, please. On a practical note, SES serves serves 7 of the 10 world's largest telcos. We think in terms of gigabits per second and more on a per site basis. And the fastest growing part of our business in recent years has been to mobile platforms, meaning aircraft, ships, and we think that that's just an outstanding market and application for satellite, particularly with regard to 4 and 5G rollout. We are partnered with some of the world's largest oil and gas providers who take advantage of our high throughput capabilities. We do this through a multi-orbit MEO and GEO constellation. So let's go to the next slide, please. So SES is a world's largest operator, and we operate on a global basis. However, we think regionally and we invest locally. And SES has made quite substantial investments into the Middle East region with our multi-orbit constellations. Today, we bring no fewer than 12 GEO satellites, and the most recent of which is SES 12, providing high HTS capacity over the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We take pride in our ability to support local requirements as well as to connect this region to the rest of the world. Next slide, please. So just to drill down just a little bit more around the kinds of investments that SES is making today. So on the infrastructure side, you see here a sampling of some of the coverage that SES brings to the Middle East, and particularly Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with most recently, again, our SES-12 KU HTS satellite. But to be clear, and what's not shown here are the MEO constellations. We'll talk about that in one moment. So we've made substantial infrastructure investments in this region in the past and continue to do so with more launches that are going to expand what we are able to do for customers in this region, in particular around wireless 4G and 5G. But investment is not simply about infrastructure and CapEx. It's also about partnership. It's about engaging in the community and the economy of a region. And on the right here, you see that SES is very much involved in partnerships that we believe bring benefits to business and benefits to quality of life in the Middle East region. Next slide, please. So again, we think in terms of multi-orbit, we are the only GEO and MEO operator today with our legacy wideband satellites at GEO, an expanding set of GEO HTS satellites. And for at least the past 10 years, SES has been operating at NGSO with our O3B system in MEO. In the GEO, all of that combined allows SES to think as a network operator. We don't think of ourselves as a satellite operator so much as a solutions provider and a network operator who brings the right sort of the right sort of resources to the applications that we're looking to serve, whether they be for broadcast, whether they be for enterprise networks, whether they be for telcos or mobile network operators. In the GEO widebeam category, SES is leveraging C-band, KU-band, and Ka-band spectrum. In the GEO HTS category, SES is using KU-band, Ka-band, Q and V-band spectrum. And in our MEO category, SES is currently operating O3B power with Ka-band and Q and V. We have 20 satellites at MEO today. And in fact, there's a little typo here, not 7 satellites under procurement, but in fact, 11 new satellites on the way. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, Andrew. I think we're going to have, I think that's your time up for that intro. I think we're going to have to move on, I'm afraid. We're just running a bit short of time. I think
okay. All right, very good.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. It's very interesting to hear the new satellite technologies, and they obviously play an important role in providing coverage, and not only coverage, but hopefully more affordable broadband connections in rural areas. Now I'd like to introduce Detlef Führer. He's a senior manager of Spectrum Management Regulatory Affairs at HP Europe, and he's going to talk about Wi-Fi and 6 gigahertz, I believe. Thank you very much. Over to you, Detlef.
Thank you very much, Umberto, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today to present. Today I would like to talk to you about license-exempt spectrum and the role it plays for facilitating wireless access and investments for a smarter future. Next, please. Okay, so I think, it's bit bigger. Right, so I'm with Hewlett Packard Enterprise, as Roberto said, and more specifically, I'm with the Aruba Networks division, which is the wireless enterprise networks division of HPE. So that's why you will see both names. Just very quickly on the company, you see it here. We're quite a big company, 60,000 people, $30 billion revenue. In wireless enterprise networks, we are number 2 worldwide, and we're serving quite a large number of applications and markets. We are particularly proud of having a long-standing commitment in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia since the early 1980s, actually, and we're serving the kingdom from our Riyadh offices. Thank you. Next, please. Okay, back to the actual subject of my talk. So spectrum policies, what should spectrum policies do? And if you can do next, please. Yeah, they should do facilitating wireless access and investments. As we know, they should aim for future-proof planning, allocation, enable and ensure an effective use of spectrum, and of course provide the foundations for the digital infrastructure of the future. Now, these objectives are of course not an end in themselves, but they have a higher purpose. Next, please. Which is enabling the knowledge-based society, enhancing the competitiveness of a society, securing a decent standard of living for our citizens, and securing the stability and continuity of the society. So these are, I think, some of the most important higher level objectives of spectrum policies. Now, how does license exempt spectrum fulfill these aforementioned objectives? Next, please. Well, license-exempt spectrum, to give one example, is a preferred medium for indoor wireless broadband connectivity. I think this is undisputed. Next, please. And what the availability of license-exempt spectrum does, what we saw, what happens is that it induces investments in broadband access infrastructure. Next, please. So this, let's say, basic, say, diagram, but now if you have, let's say, an access infrastructure and you have cost-effective and performant indoor wireless connectivity solutions, what happens is that actually there's a drive or pressure on investment, making more investments in that broadband access infrastructure to achieve higher, let's say, capacity, higher speeds, higher performance, which in turn then also again drives, let's say, innovation on the side of the wireless connectivity solutions, and so on and so on. So this actually results in a positive feedback loop in terms of performance and innovation, and this is what we have been seeing happening with license-exempt spectrum. Next, please. Furthermore, numerous studies found that license-exempt spectrum provides an enormous economic benefit to society. Next, please. Now, here's an example from a study by Telecom Advisory Services from 2018, which they estimated the economic value of Wi-Fi alone. So we're not talking about license-exempt spectrum in general, but Wi-Fi alone, of $2 trillion globally, and the estimate for 2023 is roughly $3.5 trillion. Next, please. Now, there are estimates based on the methodology used by TAS that for Saudi Arabia, that would translate into an economic value of roughly $12 billion by 2023, and for the United Arab Emirates of roughly $10 billion. Next, please. So you could say that actually governments do not make any money from making license-exempt spectrum available, but so it would be some sort of an investment, but in fact this would be an investment in society. And also one aspect you have to consider here is that license-exempt spectrum is actually used by other services incumbents, which do not have to move out, so they can continue using this spectrum. So what you get by making available license-exempt spectrum is additional value. Next, please. Now, what does license-exempt spectrum mean in terms of future-proof planning allocation? And I would like to give you an example here. Next, please. So almost 25 years ago, there was a little bit of spectrum allocated for license-exempt usage. And from that, a long-lasting success story evolved, which all of you know. Next, please. That is namely Wi-Fi. So back in the 1990s, there was like 183 megahertz of spectrum allocated, and then this increased by another 355 in 2003. At the time, we had 50 million devices installed. Now we have 13 billion with the same amount of spectrum. Next, please. License-exempt spectrum has shown that it can use spectrum very effectively. Next, please. There's no restriction to particular technology or application, which is one big strength. Next, please. You see that in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz band where multiple technologies coexist. Next, please. And then probably the best example is the 5925 to 7125 megahertz band where WAS-ALAN will coexist and share that band with multiple incumbents. Next, please. The situation in the United States where you have various incumbent services and operators coexisting with WAS-ALAN. Next, please. Similar situation in Europe, where in the first step, the lower 6 gigahertz band is going to be made available, and it has been decided already, and that will be shared with incumbents. And for the upper 6 gigahertz band, that is expected to happen in the second step. That is the approach that the CPT took, and we have essentially the same incumbents. Yeah, I think my time's up. Next, please. That will be the final slide. Right. And also license-exempt bands are important for the digital infrastructure of the future, which will, of course, comprise a mix of technologies. This was the most important slide probably of the presentation, that we definitely share that view that there will not be one dominating, or there should not be one dominating licensing regime or technology, but a mix which will address all the various applications and scenarios. Okay, I'm finished here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Detlef. That's very interesting. We have a number of questions, but before we move to the question, I wanted to ask one question to try and tie these together, because the idea is that we want a range of complementary technologies. We need mobile, 5G IMT, we need Wi-Fi or license exempt, we need satellite as well to provide coverage. But one of the questions on this panel is to look at a market-orientated approach. So I just wanted to ask each of you perhaps what your views are on a market-orientated approach. So we understand that for mobile, that would be auctions or spectrum pricing or a combination of both. And in some countries, satellite, I think, pay spectrum fees. But I'm just wondering what you think is the applicability of market-orientated approaches, perhaps for your particular sector, and how that could be used in general, without being too specific, how it could be used in general, what the key issues are for helping to decide for a regulator how much spectrum might be awarded, say, to RLANs versus IMT or some example like that. So maybe I could start off with Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roberto. I think there are differences between the licensed spectrum and the unlicensed. You know, there are different usage of spectrum. For example, the satellite is available internationally, where the IMT will be auctioned to operators. Also, on the other hand, you see that the Wi-Fi is available unlicensed, so it's difficult to predict the demand. However, I think the regulators, they have to do some studies to assess the needs of spectrum for every service. Talking about Wi-Fi, satellite, IMT, it's difficult to compare between each of them. However, I think for every country, it's the regulator duty to determine the needed spectrum for every service.
Thank you very much. Andrew, do you have a view?
Sure. I think that market-oriented approaches have a role to play in ensuring that investments are managed correctly. although I don't think that they're going to apply in every and all cases. Particularly, one of the assumptions I think that are made in the application of a market-oriented approach are things like scarcity, and in some of the markets and some of the applications, that's just not the case. There's quite I think a large amount of legacy spectrum assigned to many of the applications that are in consideration today, and regulators really need to think very carefully about how do, as you had said yourself, how do we ensure a diverse set of capabilities with the appropriate technology supporting the right application. So yes, market applications, market techniques are applicable, but not in every case.
Okay. I mean, does either Detlef or Sam have something different to add, or?
Well, not really different, I must say. I mean, Mohamed said that as a regulator, or for a regulator, it's very difficult really to assess all the different aspects. And I mean, of course, I'm not a regulator, but I think it's really important that regulators try to understand and assess the actual economic value that that decision spectrum policy brings for society overall, and making sure that really you have an optimum mix of licensing regimes and technologies, and make sure that the spectrum is used as efficiently as possible. But I mean, there's of course very different situations from country to country and application by application. So indeed, this is very complex. So there wouldn't be, I think, any simple answer possible. Thank you.
Okay.
So I think yes, I think that that it's a very difficult to allocate it for each service, each frequency band. But at least in the case of the HIPS or HAPS, this kind of system, maybe actually we can share the frequency band for the service link with the IMT terrestrial network. So that's why that is a very specific situation.
Okay. So we have a number of questions in from the audience. So here's one for Mr. Samu. Will the mobile device connect directly to the HIPS-HAPS base station? And if yes, how will the power of the mobile, will it be sufficient to make the communication work? And that's from Ibrahim Al-Hawas.
Yes, actually the answer is yes. And then with the normal actually user device, we can connect to the the base station in the Stratosphere layer. Actually, the original design of 3GPP is designed as the connection is like until 100 kilometers. So that's why it's possible. Now from original station, from the beginning, it's kind of possible thing to connect between the two things having distance of 100 kilometers.
Okay, I guess it's line of sight.
Already proved with the experiment.
Okay. So I have another question here from Manuel Marti on Saudi Arabia. Could you share more details of the light licensing regime and what bands will be used in the database and such? Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. I think we are developing our outlook now. It's in draft. So there are some frequency bands talking about the 10 gigahertz and also the 28. We are discussing the possibility of putting this band lightly licensed for IMT services, knowing that it is allocated for fixed satellite service. There are some bands that we are exploring the possibility of applying the light licensing regimes for these bands. So it will be, we're hopeful that it will be published in the next weeks. So we invite everybody to provide their feedbacks with regard to the draft outlook that we are expecting to publish. Yes.
Okay, now that sounds very interesting. So I've got a question here for Andrew. Will the orbits that are projected cover South American countries like Colombia? That's from Marlene Yates.
Oh, no question about it. In fact, SCS provides service to that part of the world today with multiple geo resources. as well as our MIO O3B system. The new system that we'll be launching next year, O3B Empower, which is going to double down on the principles that we established previously of low latency and high throughput, will also cover Colombia. In fact, it's a global constellation, which is going to bring some, carrier-grade flexible solutions to the entire world.
No, I assumed it was a global system.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a question for Mohammed. What are the national challenges when refarming the 600 band, and how will coordination with neighbors be handled? That's from Mustafa Abdul Hafiz Witadala. I hope I've got that right.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roberto. I think it's very difficult to harmonize the 600 megahertz band for IMT, knowing that it is an agenda item for the WRC 23 to be allocated for the mobile service region 1. We basically, in Saudi Arabia, we have many neighboring countries. We will try to do the needful actions in coordination with some of the neighbors in order to deploy this band for IMT services. We know that it's very difficult, knowing that the broadcasting service has very high power, but we will try to do the needful with the neighboring countries. With regard to the national basis, we are coordinating internally to repack the current assignments or internal assignments for broadcasting, knowing that the digital TV in MENA region is not utilized. The band of 614 to 694 is not utilized efficiently to deliver the digital TV services, the terrestrial digital TV services. So we are trying to and coordinating internally to repack the current channels or the multiplexes to be down 614 megahertz. We think that it will be appropriate and beneficial for the public here at Saudi Arabia to experience and have the best user experience for IMT services, knowing that 600 megahertz is very important for rural areas. Saudi Arabia is a very large country that need extra bands in the sub 1 gigahertz.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're nearly out of time, so I'll just leave one final question for Detlef, as he hasn't to give him a question. So I think on Wi-Fi 6E, can you explain what 6E is versus 6 and when the equipment will reach the market?
Yeah, thank you, Roberto. Well, from a technical standpoint, the only difference between 6 and 6E is the frequency range. So 6 is also known as 802.11ax, and 6E is that technology operating in the 5925 to 7125 megahertz band. And when is equipment going to be available? I mean, there have been some announcements already. Chipsets have been announced a couple of months ago. I think there was one chipset certified just yesterday by the Wi-Fi Alliance. There have been announcements of consumer access points earlier this year, and also on the enterprise network front during 2021 when the regulations will be put in place, for instance, in Europe, which should happen between the second quarter and the third quarter of next year. And then we expect also equipment to hit the market.
Okay, thank you very much. So it sounds like we can expect ITU meetings not to have any problems with Wi-Fi capacity in the near future.
Well, yes, I guess so, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, I'll pass back to Dan.
Roberto, thank you so much, and a big thank you as well to all of our panelists in that session. And apologies for having to cut some of you short. I was conscious that we didn't have much time left for the discussion, and as we could see, there are lots of questions coming in. So if there are any questions that we didn't get a chance to answer in that session, we will email those forward to our speakers and panelists, and there'll be a chance for them to maybe respond to any of the questions we didn't get to offline. So Roberto and all of our panelists, thank you so much again for another fascinating discussion. So we're moving straight on. We now have our next session, which is moving on to looking at spectrum for verticals. So looking at redefining spectrum users to meet vertical needs. So that's going to be starting here again on the main stage in just a few seconds. It's going to be moderated by Richard Marsden from Nera Consulting. So Richard will be here in, as I said, just around about 30 seconds or so to get started with that next session. Thank you so much again to all of our panelists and to Roberto for that last session, and we'll see you back here very shortly. Thank you.